Today I'm going to take you through a mobility sequence that is catered to recovery or mobility days if you are in a deadlift-focused strength training program. So if you have any form of deadlifts in your strength training or you're working on improving your deadlifts, this is a great flow or a great set of movements to do on your days that you're not deadlifting. This is one way that we can implement mobility training into our strength training work, is dedicating an entire 20 minutes to our mobility practice or an entire day to just mobility focused work. So there are a lot of joints involved in the deadlift, and you could be experiencing some aches and pains for many different reasons from your deadlift practice. But today we are going to focus on the lower back or the lumbar spine, right? As we are deadlifting, especially if it's a conventional barbell deadlift, for lifting heavy loads, the lower back does take a toll, right? We want more of the weight to be into the hips, but the lower back does need to be able to brace and stabilize in that position. We're also going to be focusing on the hips, which go through flexion, bending at the hips, and extension at the top. We need a really strong top of that hip extension to pull the weight all the way up. And we'll be stretching out the outside of the hip into some hip external rotation as well. So we're going to do 5 movements. You're going to need a bench or a chair, a heavy weight or something that's immovable that we can pull against, that sits on the floor or about a foot or 2 away from the floor. 1 or 2 yoga blocks, and we'll be using a mobility stick. You could also hold on to something like a wall. We're just going to be using that for stability. So let's get started. Let's work on the lumbar spine first. There are 5 lumbar vertebrae, and we're going to be sequencing through those vertebrae one at a time into flexion and extension. We're going to block the mid and upper back into flexion. So we're just going to release tension in that lower back by moving those joints. So in a deadlift, this lower back is very still. We need to be able to brace those joints as we lift, right? From here, that's carrying a lot of load and a lot of responsibility back there. So we also need to be able to move those vertebrae if we want them to function at their highest capacity in a stabilized position. So let's get down on the floor, and we're going to use 2 yoga blocks. We're going to place the hips in a slight internal rotation. So the knees are going to be about hip width apart, and the feet are going to be outside of the knees just slightly. That's going to make the movement a little bit more intense and difficult. So if that is not accessible to you, if you can't feel your lower back moving in that position, then bring those feet right behind the knees, and that should make it a little bit easier for you. So we're going to squeeze 1 block between the thighs. That should place your legs about hip width apart. If you need a little more space, you can turn the block sideways this way, right? And then the feet are going to be outside of those knees just slightly. Then we're going to bring the other yoga block down in front of you, and you're going to place the back of your head against this yoga block here. So we are curling the back to place the back of the head against the yoga block, and we're going to hold on to the yoga block, almost pulling it in towards the head. That's going to block your spine into this flexed position. I want you to also shift your weight forward so that we get even more into that flexed position. So pulling on that yoga block is going to help block that upper back into that flexed position. Knees are going to be underneath the hips, and the hips can shift forward on top of that. So we want the toes extended and tucked under, and we're in our max flexed position here. So from here, we're going to sequence through those 5 lumbar spine, including the tailbone and the sacrum. So we'll tip the tailbone up first and then sacrum, and then sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into extension. But we're still pushing into that block so that the upper back is still round. So the lumbar spine stops right around your waistband or a little bit above around your waist. That's where you're going to stop your spinal extension. So we don't want that extension to carry over into the rest of the spine. Then from there, we're going to flex the spine, again, starting from the tailbone, sacrum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, into that flexed position. And then let's go again. Meanwhile, we're squeezing the block between the knees, pressing those toes into the floor, and pulling that yoga block into the back of the head for that nice little neck flexion stretch. Round that spine again, and then let's go again, extending that spine, tipping the tailbone up, sequencing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathe and exhale as we scoop that tailbone under.
tailbone, sacrum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you need to take a breath, it's hard to breathe in this position. So if you need to just release the neck here, you can work here. It doesn't have to be as extreme. Extend that spine and around through that spine. We're going to aim for about 10 reps of these. We're working really slow and with intention because this is either post lift or on a day that you're not lifting. So we are able to dedicate a little more time and specificity to this mobility work. Extend and breathe. And extend to flex under. And extend. I'm going to do one more. You can pause and keep going if you're aiming for that 10 reps. And around that spine, scooping under. And then we'll slowly come on out of it. So now that we've got the lumbar spine moving, let's go into some combining the hip flexion with some of that lumbar movement. So we're going to head to our chair or bench and our heavy weight or immovable object. So you're going to stand on top of your bench. You want about hip width apart. You could go into your deadlift stance if you're working sumos or RDLs or conventional trap bar, whatever you're doing in your strength program. That's the stance that you can adopt for this stretch. We're just going to squat and reach down towards the kettlebell or your weight. Now, if this is too far for you to reach, then you can also bring the weight up to you. Just place it on some yoga blocks or a block, step stool, something that's going to bring the weight up to you, or you could just simply do this on the floor. You could even place a towel under your feet and pull up into this stretch with the towel. I need a little bit more stretch, so I'm going beyond that floor position. So we're going to grab onto that weight. We're in our squat position in between those legs here. And then we're going to extend the knees, stretching into the hamstrings, that hip flexion, and you're going to let the spine round. So we are rounding the spine through and through, just like we practiced on the floor, and that's full global spine flexion. So go ahead and drive those feet down into the floor or your elevated surface and let that spine round. Now, I almost want you to imagine you're trying to lift up, like you're trying to lift that weight off of the floor by rounding, and almost like you're taking a string from your lumbar spine and pulling it up towards the ceiling. Okay, so you're pulling up, 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 up here. This is an active stretch. Okay, so we're going to feel some stretch in the spine, maybe a stretch in the lats, release the neck. You could find a stretch in the hamstrings here. We're driving down with those feet, pulling up with that back. Hold here. We're really going to try to actively hold this stretch. Keep lifting up. Every time you exhale, I want you to imagine that you are knitting your rib cage together, which is going to get a little more abdominal engagement here in this compressed position. Let's take 2 more breaths. And then we're going to release the tension by bending those knees. Now, we're not going to go in between those thighs again. Keep those knees outside of your body or inside of the lats, right in front of the rib cage. We're just folding over here. And then if you are able to get your chest all the way to your thighs, as you extend, you're going to try to keep your chest just as close to your thighs. So we're going back into that stretch, pulling that lower back up towards the ceiling. Deep breaths here. Feel a deep stretch in those lats. The lats take a beating in deadlifts, so we want to really stretch those out. Compressing that body. We're going to take another 2 breaths. See if you can extend those knees all the way. And then we're going to release the tension again, bending those knees, still holding on to that heavy weight. We're going to go one more time into that stretch, and then we're going to start moving the spine there. So we're really, really deep into this hip flexion, this passive hip flexion, this stretch, and we'll work actively into that hip flexion on our next movement. But for now, we're going to stick with the spine. So we're going to pull into that stretch once more. Now, the feet are still going to drive into the floor. The arms are still going to pull up on your weight, and you're going to start extending and flexing the entire spine. So we're already in this flexed position. You're going to try to stay in this deep stretch as you try to extend, reaching the tailbone up towards the ceiling, all the way to the top of the neck. Now is when we're really going to start to feel that hamstring stretch. Embrace it, take a breath, and then let's round the spine, scooping the tailbone under, pulling deeper into that spinal flexion. Let's do that 4 more times. Extend through the tailbone, extending the entire spine through the top of the head, and hold. We're still pulling up on that weight. And then round that spine, sequence from the tailbone, sacrum, all the way through the 5 lumbar, the 12 thoracic, and the 7 cervical spine. Last 3, extend. It's like a big cat-cow, but we're doing this in a different base position from our normal hands and knees quadruped position. Okay, so we're not really going to get much into that extended or really either position of that spine. Go ahead and round that spine. I'm even feeling some of my hips and extend. That left hip is being challenged in its internal rotation. So I'm feeling deep within that left hip capsule here. Round that spine, we're almost there. Especially here, I'm feeling those inner thighs deep within the hip capsule. Let's go one more time, extending the spine. It's a very small movement. So keep breathing and round the spine one more time. And slowly release. We're going to release the weight. Ooh, standing up. Come on down from that position. Shake out the legs. So now let's work into active hip flexion. The rest are not as slow and tedious. It's much easier to breathe through the rest of these movements. So we are going to do some hip flexion hovers, but I want you to hang off of your chair or bench if that's accessible to you. So we could do this from a seated position. You could sit against a wall or a surface. You could place your hands behind you. We're going to lift up into hip flexion, up and over. But what we don't want is the lumbar to now help with that hip flexion by rounding. So if you think of this as the bottom of your deadlift, okay? I'm in the bottom of my deadlift here. I'm in that deep hip flex position, and my lumbar is not helping with that. I'm not rounding that lumbar spine. Same thing, if I just turn it here, we want that lumbar to be completely isolated from whatever is happening in the hips. So you can do it on the floor, or we could suspend the hips, which is going to add a little element to the stabilization of that lumbar spine. So you would set up just like you would if you're doing a hip thrust, okay? So the upper back is going to be on the bench, just below the shoulder blades. I suggest resting your hands here on the bench. And then what we're going to do is sink the hips down towards the floor. So those hips should hang nice and heavy in this position. And we just stretched into a similar position. So our hips are ready to go into this hip flexion. So then you're going to grab your yoga block and you're going to place it just outside of the right foot in front of it. And then you're going to extend your right leg out on the floor. So both hips again are hanging down towards the floor. The spine is nice and extended. My shoulders are away from the ears. I've got heavy, heavy hips. Now I'm going to lift the right leg up and over the block. Now as I lift, I'm trying not to swing this left hip to the side. So I've also got some stabilization on that left side of the body, those posterior obliques on the left side, which also helps stabilize the lumbar spine, which we need in deadlifts. So we're stabilizing on the left side as the right leg lifts. We're using the front of the hip and those quads. We're going to lift up and over that block and bring it down. Now, as you lift and lower, we're going to do this with control. Okay, don't let that leg slam down towards the floor. We're going to float the leg nice and softly back down towards the floor. So we lift up, hover over, float the leg down. And then again, lifting up, hover in, and float. Now, the closer the block is to you, the harder it's going to be. If you're having a hard time hovering over the block, you can slide the block closer to your ankle, or you can hover over something smaller. And reverse. We also want to do about 6 to 10 of these. We're going to do 6 for now. 3 more. Again, make sure that lumbar is nice and extended. We don't want scooping under of that tailbone. Basically working and grooving the bottom of your deadlift position. Making that position super strong in the hips and the lumbar. And we'll go one more time, moving slowly and with control. Definitely feeling the quads with this one. And back in. And rest. All right, so you can come out of that position and we will reset for the other side. Okay, so you can just place the block if you already know where you want it to go outside of that left leg. Or you can set up that base position and then set up that block depending on where you're going to be at. So we'll get into this hip thrust base position. Now the right side is stabilizing while the left side is working. Again, we want to push back and lean into that bench so that the hips are hanging nice and heavy towards the ground. As you lift the left leg, try not to sit out with that right hip. Okay, here we go. Lift up, hover over, independent hip from the lower back. Float that leg down, lift up with control as we hover back in. And again, I'm going to sink a little bit lower into this position to make it a little more challenging. So now my hips are lower to the ground. It's going to be more challenging for both my lower back and for my left leg. Now this could also just be a really nice stretch for your spine after doing deadlifts where we're really compressing the spine. This is going to decompress or lengthen that spine. So you could just do this passive stretch with both knees bent after you do a set of, or you're working sets of deadlift on your heavy lifting days. Lift, back in. Last 3, up and over. You want it to be challenging. So you want to be able to lift over the block, but not easily. Each rep, you want that challenge. So if we were just pretending to hover over a block, you could easily cheat and get away with it. You would never know if that leg is getting lower and lower with each rep. Now that we're hovering over something tangible, you're going to know if that leg isn't getting quite as high in that hover. Keep breathing. Last one coming in. And rest. Ooh, okay. So we've got 2 more movements. We've worked our lumbar, we've worked our hip flexion, passively and actively. Let's work some passive hip extension and hip external rotation. A nice little pigeon stretch for that external rotation of the front hip. So we're gonna start. We're gonna grab onto a stick or a wall. So if you're using a wall, you can face the wall. So we'll press that hand forward as we get into it. Let's go with the right leg first. So the right leg is going to be in front. We're in a 90-90 or shin box position. If we need to regress, if you already know you need to regress, go ahead and sit on that yoga block, which is going to give a little more relief for this hip and this hip as we extend that leg back. Okay, so from your 90-90 or shin box, we are going to pitch the body forward. So we're driving that right knee into the floor, pulling the right hip away from that right knee. We want the right hip to be right behind that right knee. So we don't want the knee to be outside of that hip. Pitching forward, flexing that right foot. We're going to lengthen that front leg, okay? Take a deep breath in this stretch. Then we're going to extend the left leg back into your pigeon. All right, so as you get back there, we're going to internally rotate and spin the top of that left thigh towards the floor, and then we're going to almost roll up onto that left hip. The stick is going to go in your left hand to help lift up onto that hip. I'm going to use my right hand here. You can also use a yoga block under that right hand to prop my hips up here into this position, and I'm going to basically place that stick at 11 o'clock right in front of my right foot. And imagine that I'm reaching the top of the stick away from the toes of my left foot. So I've got a nice long position between the toes of the left foot and the top of that stick. So now we're going to activate this stretch by lengthening the floor. So you're going to try to pull that right foot towards the stick and drive the left foot away from the stick and that right foot. So isometrically, we're lengthening the floor between those 2 feet, and then we're gonna shorten the floor. So it's barely visible, just like those spine movements. We're gonna try to drag the right foot towards the left hip and try to drag that left foot forward. And again, let's extend or lengthen that floor between the right leg and the left foot. Make sure that spine is nice and long, and then let's shorten the floor. We can do 5 all the way up to 10 reps of these isometrics, depending on how tight those hips are feeling. And again, let's lengthen the floor. We're just gonna do 5 for today. And shorten the floor. Really feel how the front of that left hip activates as you shorten the floor. Let's go 2 more, lengthen. Keep breathing and shorten. And last one, lengthen. And shorten. All right, see if you can get a little further into that stretch. And then we can slowly come on out of it and switch sides. Oops. You can put your support down on the floor. Left leg is going to be in front, right leg is in back, either with that shin box or 90-90 position. We want the left knee right in front of that left hip. We're going to pitch the body forward, lengthening that spine, tipping that tailbone out behind you. Make sure this left foot is flexed. Then we're going to extend that right leg behind you and internally rotate that right leg, top of the knee and top of the foot on the floor as we roll up onto that right hip. Stick's gonna go in the right hand, or you're gonna reach that right hand forward to the wall, and we're gonna pitch forward here. So the top of the stick and the right foot are reaching away from each other in this stretch. Okay, we're feeling a stretch on the outside of that left hip. Could feel a stretch in the front of that right hip. Just breathing into this position, drive that stick into the floor, drive the top of that right foot into the floor as well. And let's start with our isometric. So let's start lengthening the floor first. Again, this is very hard to find or to see. Okay, so we're imagining that we're lengthening the floor between the left foot and the right foot, but we're not actually moving out of this position. If anything, we're trying to get further into the stretch. Then shorten that floor. Drag the left foot back, pull that right foot and hip forward. Keep breathing. And then let's lengthen the floor, pulling those 2 points apart, away from each other. And shorten the floor. And again, lengthen. Keep breathing, keep reaching. And shorten. As you exhale, last 2, lengthen that floor, drive that left foot forward, right foot back. And shorten. And let's go, last one, lengthen. And shorten. Good, let's release that tension. Slowly come on out of that position. So we're gonna finish up with one more movement. We're gonna work into active hip extension, and we're gonna flex the knee. So we're gonna work the knee or the hamstrings in their lengthened and shortened position, almost like we're doing a leg curl on top of hip extension. So we're gonna start in a collapsed quadruped position. So we'll go hands and knees. You're gonna reach the right leg behind you into hip extension. Then you're gonna shift back. Okay, so I'm gonna shift the left hip back towards my left heel, and you can either walk those hands out wide and place a yoga block underneath your forehead here, or you can come down to the forearms, right? If you know you're not gonna be able to lift from this deep, deep position, then you could also shift forward and lift from a higher position. The closer your hips are to the floor, the harder it's gonna be to lift. So if you are having trouble, shift forward. You can also bring your forehead down if you're in this more forward position. So we're gonna lift the leg into hip extension. Right leg's gonna stay straight. It's very important now that the lumbar is round and flexed. Okay, so we're scooping that tailbone under tucking the tailbone between your legs and rounding that lower back. We're going to maintain that flexion of the lumbar as we lift the right leg up into hip extension. Keep that knee nice and straight and hold. While we're holding this hip extension, I want you to keep lifting the thigh off the floor. As you bend your knee, you're going to try to kick your hip, your butt with your right heel. Trying to bend, kick your butt with your right heel. And then you're going to try to extend that knee, keeping that thigh high off the ground, and then bring the leg down. And then we're going to go again. So we're getting deep into the glutes with this one for the hip extension, and we're getting deep into the hamstrings. So we're bending as far as we can, tensing the hamstring in that shortened position, that knee flexed position, which is not really what we get in the deadlift, but really good training for that hamstring. Go ahead, extend. We need to train those tissues in opposite directions. Good, bring that foot down. And then let's go again. We want to hit about 8 to 12 reps of these. If you're going a little bit slower, you want to go on the shorter, smaller side of that rep scheme. And bring the leg down. Make sure as you're lifting that the toes are not turning out to the side. Keep those toes down. Keep that right hip reaching to the floor as the left hip pulls away from that left knee. Extend. And bring it down. You can feel some tightness in the front of that left hip as we're doing this movement. That's totally normal. If it's too much, you can shift forward out of that deep collapsed quadruped position. And let's do one more lifting into hip extension. Keep that hip extension as you bend and extend and bring it down. Okay, we'll slowly come out of that position and let's see how the opposite side is feeling. So we'll get to that collapsed quadruped from hands and knees, extending that left leg out, shifting back, and then bringing that torso towards the floor. Again, we want the spine to be round in this position. That's how we're gonna get full glute engagement here. And bringing that forehead down helps with that spinal flexion, very similar to the spine movements we were doing in the beginning of the session. So keeping that left leg straight, we're gonna lift up, push it forward just slightly. Then we're gonna bend the knee, trying to keep the thigh lifting off the floor, bending as far as you can, cramping up the hamstring. As you extend, lift higher, and bring the leg down. If you are cramping in the hamstring, just punch it out and get right back into it. The more you practice, the less that cramping will happen. Lift and then bend, trying to really get that posterior chain working only here. And extend on that left side anyway. Anterior chain, those quads are working in the front of the hip on the right side. Left side, we just want the glutes and the hamstring. Now the hamstring also helps to extend the hip. So in this position, the hamstring is also helping to keep that leg off the floor, which could be why we feel such a deep contraction in that hamstring muscle as we bend that knee in this extended position. This is a really great drill for runners as well, especially if you're doing intervals, sprint intervals, or if you are a sprinter. This is really, really important, that knee flexion while the hip is extended. Bend. Keep that hip extended. Keep lifting that leg off the floor as you extend. And down. Remember that big movements are not necessarily better. Okay, it's actually more challenging and we're getting more benefits if you're doing this movement really close to the floor, pushing yourself to lift as close to your end range as possible. It's never about how high that leg can go or how deep you can get, how close to end range you're working, how close to your own end range you're working. All right, let's slowly come out of that position. Excellent work. So I hope you feel really nice and open in the hips and that the lumbar feels a little bit of TLC, especially after doing a lot of heavy deadlifting work throughout your training program. If you have any questions about these movements, drop them in the comments below and I'll see you next time.